So now we've got species will interact with each other. What scientists have gone is they've been trying for years and years and years to understand the grand scheme of how they interact with each other. And they created what are known as trophic structures. These are going to be, you've probably heard of food chains. Food chains aren't so much a thing anymore. They're too simplistic. They were very, very easy for somebody in kindergarten to understand. But as you get more and more, a greater and greater understanding of the natural world, you start to see that these are more three-dimensional webs. But there is always a distinct structure there. And that structure of a community is going to revolve around how those organisms feed. That is, who's eating who. And you'll notice it does look almost like a pyramid. At the very, very top, let's start at the bottom. We got plants. These are your autotrophs. These are your producers. They make a lot of food on their own. There are going to be a lot of these in relation to the other ones. Eating those are going to be your herbivores. They are heterotrophs, but they're going to generally eat those autotrophs. They're going to eat the things that are making the food. On top of that, eating the herbivores, you have your primary predators. These are the predators that prey on the herbivores. And at the very, very top of the chain are the secondary predators, and they're the ones that eat the primary predators. You have very few secondary predators for each of your primary predators. And you have fewer primary predators than you have of herbivores. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to support the system. So, if you were to create a linear chain and say, around the school, I don't know, the grass is eaten by deer, which are eaten by coyotes, which are eaten in turn by, I don't know what eats coyotes. You create a chain. But in reality, if you were to look at the interactions, it does look more like a web, because you might have birds eating snakes and snakes eating birds. Does that make sense? So you have these different interactions, different predator-prey relationships that evolve over time. Heck, in different seasons, you may have entirely different relationships between predator and prey, just based on what resources are available. These food chains are going to be heavily impacted by two very important groups: the dominant species and what are known as keystone species. Dominant species are easy. They're the ones that have the highest biomass. They're the ones that are the most abundant. In this image, what is the dominant species? Incorrect. The grass. The grass will outweigh, the sheer amount of grass will outweigh the Komodo dragon. That's what's dominant in that region. Doesn't mean it's the highest tier predator. It just means that it's the most abundant. The other very important type of organism is what's known as the keystone organism. These may not be the most abundant, but they're the ones that have an enormous influence due to their ecological role. And there are two great examples of this I want to share. One is the salmon. The salmon is absolutely essential to the ecology of the rainforest in Alaska. Not to the rivers, to the forest itself. Why? Because what ends up happening each mating seasons, the salmon will swim upriver. And as they're going, bears will sit along the river, and I kid you not, they just basically put in their paw and smack it out of the river. And then they do it again. It's just bear fishing season. As they're knocking these salmon out of the river, they eat some of them, then they go back and get more salmon. The carcasses of the salmon then are going to decay in the forest, on the ground. The bear eat their fill, and they don't eat it all, because bears are dumb. They leave a mess everywhere, okay? You've got the bears that eat their fill, other scavengers will come along and eat their fill. And as time goes on, the feces of those organisms serve as the fertilizer for the forest, and the rotting carcasses of the fish also serve as to provide nutrients. So this is lots and lots of nutrients being put into the soil that wouldn't automatically be there without this huge number of salmon. So the salmon become a keystone species. Without the salmon, the forest can't produce as many plants, as many trees. You can't have as many bears supported. You end up throwing the whole thing out of balance. Another keystone species example is the orca, the killer whale. The killer whale is in very low numbers. What ends up happening is if you have, let's not even call it the killer whale, let's look at a different tier. Let's say just the gray whale, one of the great whales, the big ones. They are preyed upon by killer whales, by orcas. What if the number of large whales, the prey, dropped? You would expect the orca population would drop because you don't have the resources, right? That's not what we see happen. The orcas then say, great, I don't have enough food from these big whales. I need to now switch to a different meal. So they begin eating They start eating seals. Sea lions first because they're bigger, then seals. You got to eat a lot more seals than you do whales. One whale is going to be 100 seals. So they go through the seals. Once the seals are gone, which happened, seal population dropped dramatically. Then they start preying on sea otters. You know how big a sea otter is? It's like, yeah, it's not big. You got to eat a lot of sea otters to make up for one seal, which you had to eat a lot of to make up for one whale. All right, so they've eaten the sea otter population down. Now the sea otter population is so low, the organisms the sea otters would eat, which are these sea urchins, are going way up in numbers. Does that make sense? Sea urchins eat kelp, specifically the bottom of the kelp. All right, so if you're eating the kelp, now the kelp are all disappearing. You know, lots of sea urchins, the kelp are disappearing. Do you guys remember what kelp serve as when we talked about aquatic ecosystems? They serve as places where baby fish live. That's where they're fisheries. Fish come there to spawn in order to protect the baby fish. The baby fish live in that dense kelp forest. Well, you have no kelp forest, which means you have no baby fish. You have no baby fish, what happens? Whole fish population disappears. You've destroyed the ecosystem because you no longer have large whales that the orcas eat. Does that make sense? Guys, I don't know if you know this. Basically, fish are going extinct. We're harvesting them as fast as we can, and our fish population's bottoming out. Crabs. You guys hear about crabs this season? Yeah, you don't hear them. You can't find money crabs, and the crabs you do find are very, very small. Alaskan crabs, the population has dropped by 90% in the past 3 years. Yeah, they're going away. So, as these major changes are happening across the world, you end up losing species very, very quickly. So, we had our dominant species, we have our keystone species. These are going to be important to these particular communities they live in.